and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today. Welcome to Our People. I'm Waylon. I'm here today with Billy, and we are talking to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Elizabeth Hunt. I live in Monte Vista, Colorado, and I grew up in Brooksville, Mississippi, and I've been away from the Holdeman community since 2009, so 15 years. And yeah, I guess I'm here to talk about my story. It really starts in, I guess, Mississippi. I grew up there, went to school there until 7th grade. My grandparents lived there. Honestly, it was a good country upbringing. I had a lot of freedom as a kid, a lot of land to roam, and there's parts that I really loved about my childhood. And then parts that really I'm still struggling to overcome. Yeah, really my grade school experience there from grade 1 to grade 7 was traumatic, I guess you could say. Um, from from my perspective, I feel that I was bullied. Not every year. It's more like maybe once I got to the older grades. And so then when my family was talking about and making plans to move to Center, Colorado, I couldn't have been more excited. I was so ready to leave Mississippi. And and our family had struggled there a lot too. I think my parents' marriage was struggling. They were my mom was came under fire from the church leadership a fair amount. She always kind of liked to push the boundaries. And then in response, she really struggled health wise with migraines and such, which that's more her story to tell. But, anyways, so yeah, we were excited as a family to leave Brooksville and come out to Center. We already had awesome friends here. We had family here. Overall, I think we just felt more accepted here. Um, so we moved out in 2008, and it was in August, and we had built a new house here, and everything about it was exciting. And then 6 months later, um, my parents separated. And I think a lot of like what made it fall apart so fast is that there were a lot of things that I think um, my parents thought that the stress of living in that particular congregation was kind of a huge source of their marriage problems. And so, um, yeah, moving out here, I think my mom had hope that it would get better. And then just realized that even though this congregation is more liberal, a lot of the same problems were still, I guess, the things that were causing stress were actually weaved into the core of what the Holdeman Church is rather than that particular congregation. So anyway, they separated 6 months later. My siblings and we left my dad along with my mom, or my mom and us kids left my dad. And around that time, we left the religion as well. So um, we actually stayed in the area and lived probably 10 minutes down the road from my dad. Um, and it was around this time where I think I started feeling safe enough to start processing the abuse that I went through as a child. Um, name the type of abuse, and I went through it. And I went through a lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. I mean, everything. And so, and I think I can still tell that it affects me now because I'm like out of breath as I'm telling this. So, yeah, I felt safe enough to start processing, and that's really where my healing journey started, was in 2009 at this little rink-a-dink trailer that we were able to rent when we left my dad. Um, and honestly, there was probably still pieces of that was traumatic that we were living through. I mean, my mom experiencing the avoidance and kind of the awkwardness that came from leaving, and people, you know, needing to practice the avoidance on my mom, but then us kids kind of were in the mix, and them not knowing for sure how to treat us kids because we were also leaving. So, there was probably still some, I don't know if I'd call it trauma, stress for sure, stress. Um, but yeah, then I started to see a therapist, I think when I don't know if it was maybe that first year, which really, I don't know if it was necessarily unsuccessful. It felt like it at the time. And it didn't last long because I didn't feel like I was getting much out of it. But yeah, I did that for maybe a few months. And now in hindsight, I kind of just see it as a stepping stone along the journey, not really a waste of time, but not necessarily um, super beneficial either. Um, and then I was thrown into the decision of whether I was going to go to high school or not. And that was terrifying. Going from this tiny little Holdeman school with maybe 10 classmates to the potential of being thrown into a public school. So I actually decided to start out online. I did a semester there, and then I decided to move an hour and a half away from my parents. The stress of their separation was really intense during that time. And so I ended up moving an hour and a half away to live with some family friends. And that was my first semester in public school I spent with them. And I was shocked that the kids were nice. They were a lot nicer than what I had ever experienced from my Holdeman classmates. And so at that point, it was kind of ingrained in me that I must either be a complete weirdo or something must be actually wrong with me, because kids in the Holdeman school were rarely ever nice to me. Um, so then you can imagine my shock when I went to public school and they were actually nice and treated me like a fellow human. Um, so it was a good experience. I was super shy, didn't really do much extracurricular um, activities. I didn't really do sports. I joined choir class and kind of liked it because I did enjoy the singing that came from the Holdeman community. I just didn't love that the religion was so intertwined with it. So choir class was kind of a cool experience of being able to get to do that without it being so attached to religion. And during this time, I think it's also important to note that I was really doing a lot of deconstructing around my beliefs. I went from being, I mean, I would say I started questioning the church maybe, oh, maybe when I was 10. And part of what brought that on is my older brothers, they were um, 7 and 9 years older than me, and they had never joined. And I was really starting to question, like, according to the church's beliefs, they would say that my older brothers, even though they weren't members that left, they know better. And so technically, their salvation is not secured because they were not Holdemans. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, how can that even be real? That I love my older brothers. They're awesome. And I just how does that even work? That, you know, two good kids could go to hell just because they aren't part of a certain church. So that was kind of like the first time I remember thinking, like, what the heck is up with that? That can't be right. Um, and then time went on, and those questions intensified. And I remember feeling really energetically unsettled by a revival minister um, when we still lived in Mississippi. It was so off putting that it would make me sick before the services. And that's not something I ever communicated to my parents because I didn't know whether they would receive it or how they would receive it or how it would be dealt with, whether it would be punished or not. So I just kind of silently dealt with it on my own and attended the services anyways. And I still to this day am not entirely sure where that feeling was coming from or what it was about. But that was one of the first times where I realized that being around energies that really directly oppose who I am and what I'm about affect me at a physical level. Um, so yeah, the questioning intensified over time, and then by the time my parents separated, I was overjoyed that we were going to be leaving the Mennonites because it was so out of alignment with who I was becoming and the thoughts that I was having. There was no way that I was going to fit into that belief system or that community. Um, and yeah, fast forward to, freshman year in high school, um, I started to deconstruct, and I went from feeling and believing that I was a Christian to almost the opposite extreme of feeling like an atheist. I wasn't sure if anything existed outside of, if any higher power was available to us. I thought maybe it was all just a load of crap. And I wasn't really sure what I thought about it all. But we had the family friends I was living with. He was really highly educated, very philosophical in his approach, and he really helped me navigate a lot of that. And basically allow question without pushing any belief system on me whatsoever. And in hindsight, that's been one of the greatest blessings that is still paying off. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today without that presence in my life, just allowing the deconstructing to take place. I probably asked questions daily there for a while. Um, and yeah, I mean, high school, I did really well. Um, I kind of was unsure how the curriculum from Holdeman school to public school would translate. I didn't know if I would be really far behind or really far ahead. And it did vary from school to school because then I ended up jumping around a lot. My sophomore year, I moved back to my mom's. I went to the school here locally, and then I even jumped schools a couple times locally, which in hindsight really wasn't the best for me because then it ended up the curriculums kind of a lot of the things that I learned were in little pieces, and maybe some stuff I missed completely. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, then in 2011 or 2012, I kind of forget the year. I want to say 2011. My mom started dating and became entered a serious relationship with an ex-Holdeman Canadian man from Linden, Alberta. So I moved to Alberta with her, and something about that drastic change and the curriculum being so much more advanced, and also the point I was in my healing journey where, I mean, things were starting to bubble to the surface in a severe way. And I was dealing with severe depression at this point, and the move to Alberta just kind of made everything fall apart within me internally. And so those last 2 years of high school were such a struggle that I ended up never even graduating because I was dealing with so much mental stress and working through past trauma. Um, I was in therapy, nothing was helping or working. I was suicidal. I did not want to be alive. I just I didn't care about anything or anyone. I was just getting by. And that is when I really started to, I think for the first time, went really deep with my therapist there. She was someone that was assigned, I believe, through public health services to be, she wasn't even a school counselor, but she was maybe a mental health liaison that wasn't really taking clients and took me on for whatever reason. I don't know, but she was absolutely a blessing for me during that time and really kind of helped me keep my head above water. I mean, in hindsight, I think a lot of people would look at that time in my life and say, "You mean you didn't graduate?" And in my mind, I'm like, I stayed alive, so that was my success. Um, and I never did complete my high school actually, but I made it through that hell. So I guess through it all, what was really amazing to me through that time is that I had a couple friends that, and I don't even think that they knew the extent of what I was going through, but they were just always there, always available, always there for me, even though I wasn't necessarily talking extensively about what I was going through. Um, and then I, well, finished high school being a relative term because I didn't graduate. I Yeah, finished high school. The relationship with what was then my stepfather was a little strained. So I came back to live with my dad in Center, and my dad and I's relationship has always been strained because he is still a member, he never left. And so, I've always lived a life pretty much since I was 13 that he doesn't agree with. And in when I went back up to visit my mom later on, I met the man that I would marry. at 20 years old. And he also was an ex-Holdeman. And although I don't call myself, do I call myself ex-Holdeman? I didn't actually join, so whatever. Um, he had actually joined, and so he um, definitely was ex-Holdeman. And we were together for 7 years. Most of that was all really, really good years together. But then it came to a point where in my healing journey, we became severely incompatible. I mean, from the time I was 20 to the time I was 27, I had pretty much become a completely different version of myself than what I was when we met. And so I guess in my most wounded self at 20 years old, um, and being compatible with him, I mean, yeah, it just changed after 7 years. And everything that I needed to continue my healing journey was so incompatible. I just couldn't see a way forward. So I left and immediately jumped into another relationship. Um, and so that was kind of chaotic because I was recovering from a divorce while also starting another relationship, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. Um, and then we were together 6 months and I became pregnant, and that was not planned. So now I have a little 1.5 year old. And it's been like a chaotic journey of still having healing from my divorce and learning, how to be in a relationship with someone new, all of that at the same time, and then being pregnant on top of all of that. It's been an intense and at times very traumatic journey. But I am at peace with where I'm at. And in terms of my beliefs, I mean, gosh, they're always evolving, they're always shifting. I've never been, I think growing up Holdeman, and leaving, although I have attended a few different churches, it was never something that stuck for me. And at this point in my life, I have no desire to be a part of a church. It's not even, my belief system doesn't even align with most modern Christianity anymore. So I just don't feel like that's the place for me. But so I guess if I had to define my belief system now, it would be somewhere between spiritual but not religious and new age, somewhere between there. But I don't love labels, and I don't really subscribe to any one belief system. I feel at this point it's a bit of an eclectic collection of things that I've pulled from various religions and my life experience that I kind of rely on. And I would say I definitely believe in a higher power. But I really hesitate to put that in any kind of box. Um, so right now, my journey is still looking like a lot of healing from my childhood trauma. It's really, really crazy to me that I'm 29 years old now, and my nervous system is still so extremely dysregulated from childhood experience. And a lot of that does have to do with the religious upbringing as well. I mean, being forced to sit through church services where, a church leader that's sitting in the front is making you physically sick, and not being able to exit or get out of the situation and just believing you have to sit through it. I mean, not even believing, I would have had no way to get out of that situation. So that's just one of many things. I had really no way to get out of the bullying I experienced at school. There was so many things that happened where I was actually trapped in the situation and had no way to get out of it. So now I find that I tend to isolate a lot because it's inherently safe. Um, I'm never gonna if I'm isolating, there's never gonna be a situation where I can't get out of it. Um, so that's kind of my coping mechanism, my go-to coping mechanism, but I am really working on that right now. Obviously, my tendency towards isolation has affected my relationships in a big way. I've struggled to have friendships. I've struggled to have relationships with some of my family. Um, it's been the bane of my existence, trying to learn how to navigate meaningful relationships and also heal at the same time. Because so much of my trauma comes from those, one of the things that really has had a long term impact on me is the way that within the Holdeman church, anyone can kind of turn on you at any time and use things that you've told them in confidence to use it against you in a way that can literally cost you your salvation. I mean, obviously, I don't believe that now, but when you're in the system, you really do believe that. That they can take things you've said in confidence to the church leadership. The church leadership can decide that's a severe problem and come to visit you and make the ultimate decision that you're not living properly or in alignment with the church's beliefs, and then they can expel you, which I never had to risk getting expelled, but I did run the risk of getting into serious trouble with my parents, grandparents, my public image being that I'm a wild child that doesn't, obviously I don't have God because I'm breaking the rules kind of thing. So I guess, life after the Holdeman Church has been kind of learning that not everyone is out to get you or use your um, personal information against you, which is still an ongoing journey for me. So I'm seeing a therapist slash life coach right now that's been incredibly helpful to me. Our belief systems are really closely aligned, which helps a lot. And I'm working on regulating my nervous system. I mean, it is severely out of whack. I can walk into a room and feel my entire body activate. And and it can be maybe just one person or a group of people that set it off, or even a physical environment that doesn't sit well. And I I have learned that I'm physically very sensitive to things going on around me. So I call it an energetic thing. I don't, someone else might have a better term for it. Um, so I've been able to, as I've kind of shed the religion, I've been able to tune into those parts of me more and not be ashamed to say or whatever that a situation is affecting me negatively and I have to get out of it. And when you're not in a religious setting, most people are pretty understanding of that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I guess if you got questions, feel free to ask them. I'm sure I left out a lot. We could go back and discuss the nitty-gritty details of anything if you guys have questions. But that's pretty much it.
I think you set a good framework for kind of your, your overarching story. And the nice thing too about editing is we can make it make sense in a linear way later too. And so that's a benefit. But I mean, for a start, it's nice hearing somebody talk about um, the way their physicality is reacting to the environment. Because we've been taught to ignore all of that because they point to signs of a spiritual problem. And and something that has been kind of difficult for me to accept is I'm experiencing even more of that now, but I'm in a situation that's safe for it to come out, if that makes sense. So, for example, last week I had to go clothes shopping because I needed a black shirt for a particular occasion, and I didn't have one anymore. And so we just walked into this simple clothing store, and I was so overwhelmed. It took everything that I had to just find a shirt that fit good and get out of there. And I still am not happy with the way that shirt fits, but I was willing to accept it and leave because I couldn't handle being there. And then going to a restaurant, we saw that it was crowded. And I was like, I can't go in there. I cannot go into that restaurant. And and going through that experience and now trying to understand, it's like, well, what what's so triggering about going into a place that's just a bunch of clothes? But then I also kind of realized the other day I was thinking about it. It's like, well, it's like the Central Clothing Center, but worse. There's more people. And and now there's this music playing, and it was just like the overstimulation of it all. And of course I'm tired and I'm hungry because I've been working all day and I am just trying to get this done. But realizing that how debilitating it can be, and realizing that these are things that come up, and it's kind of similar, like different things in church and people who were there, and how, what they would say or what the ministers would be talking about, and how you couldn't leave, even though, yeah, it's a free country. I could get up and leave at any minute, but you can't because eternity is bigger, and I need to accept it. And so I want to validate what you said because I think it's something that a lot of people will have experienced. I'm hearing more and more of people talking about how sick they felt sitting in church, hearing things that were so backwards, and inside we know better. And looking back, there's a few ministers that I know they know what they're doing. Um, and I don't know if I should name names, but I kind of want to. But there are but there are, certain revivalists who have made more of a career of being a traveling minister, and it's because of who they are and the power they wield and how it benefits the church that they are so widely traveled and they're going around being revivalists. And what they have to say and how they do it, and the things that they will do. Like, I'll never forget one time it was revivals and they wanted to meet with me. We talked about my mother the whole time. We never even talked about me other than, how are you doing with the Lord? And I was just kind of like dumbfounded. And then, oh, it's time for the church service to start. We better get in there. Um, yeah, I don't know. Just things of that, like that. But yeah, there was a few questions I had along the way, and I just kind of saved them because I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought. But I have to think back on mine because mine's the runaway train, and I'm trying to remember what I was thinking. I should have taken paper notes. Well, Waylon, maybe you'd have some questions.
Let's see. Yeah, I had a few, not big questions, but at one point you mentioned energy awareness.
Mhm.
Is that something you're into now? Do you do like energy work?
I am not currently doing energy work, no. Well, I guess define energy work. What would you define?
I don't know. It's just the reason I'm asking is because everybody we've talked to so far has been into some kind of energy work. Um, Reiki, something different ways of processing the energies they're receiving.
Yeah, so I one of the most beneficial forms of therapy that I've done was hypnosis or hypnotherapy. I don't know how you care to term that. And that was when I became, for the first time in my life, so validated for what I was picking up energetically. Um, and for me, it's something that has always been a part of my life, but I did not, for so many years, it was never validated in me. So I always thought maybe I was kind of out to lunch in some ways. But the hypnosis really almost like just it changed me in that way where I'm no longer even a little bit shy about bringing up that topic because it impacts my life in such a large way. And so, kind of how that has manifested in my life now. I'm no longer in hypnotherapy. I am doing a completely different type of therapy now. But for example, I struggle with the same thing that Billy talked about, which is just a chronic overstimulation. I'm not sure if he deals with it chronically, but I definitely do. Um, and so energy work is very important to me, and in the form that it takes currently is that I pretty much daily have to find a way to center myself. And meditation is a really easy way to do that for me, but if I don't have the time or the space to do a meditation, I will listen to binaural beats or something to just kind of help regulate my nervous system. And so to me, nervous system regulation and energetic work overlap and are almost inseparable for me personally. Um, so I just started working with a naturopath that is, she was the first day I walked into her shop, she said, "You are an empath and you have a gift." And I still don't fully know what she means by that because I don't feel like that. So I'm still gonna kind of try to find out what exactly she means. But she did explain that when I walk into the room, I can read the energy, and I resonate with that a lot. Um, I just feel like I'm an energetic sponge, and anywhere I go, I'm absorbing everything around me, and it gets to be very overwhelming. So yeah, that's meditation, binaural beats, um, even like a self-led hypnosis, like with or not self-led, I guess through a book or something. You can find short, hypnosis things on YouTube or through a book or whatever. I use that sometimes. Those are
Could,
ways to manage my sensory input and dysregulation.
just for interest's sake, could you give us a quick idea of what hypnotherapy looks like? That's something I have never looked into a lot.
Yeah, so I want to preface this by saying my experience is one tiny little sliver out of all of the different ways that hypnosis is practiced. And so I can only speak to my particular therapist and my particular experience. But I would go in and it'd be kind of like the first half of it would be kind of like a therapy session where you kind of explain what you're going through and she would give tips and advice and coping skills. And then I would typically, excuse me, I would typically lay down and she would guide me. And if you're familiar with meditation and like that deep, what is it called? There's a term for it. Almost like I think it's a theta brainwave state that meditation is able to guide your brain into. And that's essentially what hypnosis is you're guided into that theta state. I believe it's theta. Don't quote me on it. If anyone else knows, that would be great. I'm gonna call it.
That sounds correct based on what I know. Yeah, I think you're correct. Don't doubt yourself. Trust your gut.
So I'm going to call it theta then for the state of this explanation. So she would guide me down, or I believe up a staircase. And while she would guide it, it was basically my subconscious creating the safe place, and everything that happened in that safe place, such as like one common thing that we would do is take really traumatic memories or stressful situations that I was in the middle of dealing with, and we would send them down the stream. That's one small example. And then we would maybe go into a lake of healing water, something like that. It can take on many, many different forms, and especially because your subconscious is really the guiding force behind it. So it can go literally any direction. But for me, it was typically took on the form of releasing really heavy things that I was navigating in my life, and then tapping into some higher source, higher power, for a healing power, healing energy, whatever you want to call it. Does that kind of answer your question, Waylon?
Yeah. Yeah, and I Googled it while you were talking, and theta is right.
Perfect.
I was wondering about, and this is something you definitely do not need to elaborate on if you don't want to, but you talked about the bullying in school, and I was curious why, or what do you think brought about bullying by other Mennonite kids?
This is actually something that parts of it I feel like I have an understanding of, and then other parts still kind of mystify me. So the part that I do know for sure that happened is I confided in my best friend at the time, about the sexual abuse I was going through. And, young and naive, had no idea that that was literally the shittiest decision I could make for myself. And that friend later told the entire school. And so I was really like, wow, even at a body level, I can still feel this. It's, brings up my heart rate, makes me super uneasy just thinking about it. But I was, I think a lot of it stemmed from that because kids don't understand sexual abuse, especially within the confines of the Holdeman church. They have no sex education. They don't know what it means. And so I think it was almost kind of like an ick type thing. Like, ew, we found this out about you. And maybe that's a little too like honest or direct. I don't know.
Oh.
But yeah, that all I can really for sure know is that it really got severe after that. And so I know after that there were parties I weren't invited to. I would invite people over to my house for a birthday party, and people wouldn't allow their kids to come. It was really alienating, and on top of the trauma that I was already kind of navigating on my own as a kid. So that time in my life was really the deepest hell, aside from maybe my high school years when I finally started to unpack it all. But that was, even in my healing now, we work, my therapist and I, we work a lot with my inner child. And it's like every time I am in contact with that younger version of myself, she is in like the heaviest, darkest energy. Like, I don't even know how to put it into words, but it's just like the fact that I am where I am now is practically, in my mind, it's miraculous, because I don't know how I got through all of that, on top of my parents' separation, the church stress. I don't know how I got to where I am now, aside from several miracles occurring along the way. So,
Yeah, that betrayal by a friend, that's really deep. And I was also thinking, we always hear of the analogy of chickens. If there's an injured chicken, the others will peck at it, and that seems like that's what kids are, and maybe especially in a closed environment like the church, they don't know why, but they go after the injured one. That's really. I was going to ask you if adults were aware of that, but it seems they were. If kids you invited over were not allowed to come over.
so I I confided in my best friend, and that whole episode went down. The one thing that she really did correctly that I would thank her for to this day is that she told me that, um, you know, in her young way of explaining things, I don't even remember how she said it, that basically it was a non-negotiable that I needed to tell my parents what was going on. In hindsight, it didn't make much of a difference, because I told my mom, and then she told my dad, and so they were both in the know. But then I think maybe my dad thought that they needed to approach the church leadership on how to handle it. And that was when they were told that, like, under no circumstance would they allow me to be taken to any kind of therapy. And I also think it was during that time that my mom's eyes were starting to get opened about how the church deals with abuse situations. And I think, on top of the marriage stress that my dad and my mom were dealing with, to be faced with, you know, knowing that their child was going or had gone through something like that. And then that was really the disturbing part, is that because they weren't being allowed to handle it properly, the abuse actually continued. That is one of the things that's been hardest to kind of come to terms with, is that even when I did have the courage to reach out to the adults and say, here's what's going on, even at that point, I was no longer protected. I mean, not no longer, but I still at that point was not offered any form of protection. And so, which I don't really hold that against my parents. I hold that against the people who were telling them that they weren't allowed to deal with it in the way that I'm sure my mom for sure would have handled it otherwise.
And all of this is just kind of what you're feeling safe with, but like, can you provide a little bit more context of what was the context in which this abuse was happening? 'Cause I don't think it's altogether uncommon that this happens where the church knows, but the fact that there was no intervention, maybe provide a little more context about what was happening.
I do feel it is important to my at this point in my life, I have a relationship with my abuser, and we have talked actually for hours and hours on this particular thing, which I have come to find out that the reason why it all happened was because my abuser was abused 10 times worse or more or whatever than I was. And so while, many people might think, well, why didn't you go to the law or whatever, which, you know, I I maybe would have thought that was necessary if well, I'm not sure. But I did, through therapy, that is a requirement for them that they report it. And so it has been reported multiple times. And back to your question on the setting or whatever, I feel the need to protect some of the people involved, like not not because I want to protect my abuser, but because I feel that everyone in this situation was so vulnerable, because the abuser was also being abused. And so, I don't know if that makes sense because, on a grander scale, I don't believe in protecting abusers, when they are of age and a threat to the rest of society. But my particular situation is a little bit different.
Mhm.
So I don't know, it's a little bit of a touchy thing to go into the details of that all. Um,
Mm.
I that kind of clears
Yeah,
some of that up.
totally makes sense. I have a very strikingly similar situation, and so I can understand how that is. Uh, and what I'm learning and what kind of adds weight for me is that this seems to be quite common. Um, I mean, there's just so much of it, and I think a lot of it comes out of confusion and people not knowing what to do with what they don't know. We're so uneducated about sexuality, and it's such a shameful secret thing that people are trying to just figure out, and it comes out in ways that are harmful because healthy relationships, healthy sexuality are not taught in any way, and it ends up coming into these huge multi-layered, multi-generational issues. And I mean, this is a whole nother thing to unpack. But I think this is one example of kind of how those things are being perpetuated and continue because of the culture of the church.
Yes. And when you are um you're told how you're allowed to heal. I mean, that's one of the things that I take major issue with. Um, that I mean, and then like you said, the generational type thing. I mean, what I was super alarmed to find out was, in kind of like I guess you could say the reconciling between my abuser and I when we really started comparing notes, um, and started talking about how, his abusers were abused, and those people were likely kids who at one point were also abused, and then putting the pieces together of, after I first came out with that information back on the shunned page, the original shunned page. I don't know if you guys were a part of that or not. It got shut down, or maybe the admins decided to end it here a few years ago. But I came out with that information, and then I ended up having multiple people in my DMs telling me that they had gone through similar things and who their abusers were, and then finding out that this massive web of abusers and then victims, and victims that then went on to abuse because they didn't have access to proper healing. And so that's part of the reason why I don't believe that the abuse is ever okay, but it gives me such a heart for those individuals that, and an understanding of why they went on to do what they did, because they were denied the healing that I was also denied as long as we were in that community.
And I think too, kind of I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but half-assed ways of giving people permission. So like there was one point where I was allowed to see a therapist. Well, while this person actually did have education that could have made them a qualified ethical person, they were still a plain Mennonite person, and they still participated in signing release forms where the staff would know everything that we talked about. And so, I mean, just the absolute breach of ethics that is involved with that, and the fact that happens, and these unlicensed care facilities, you could say, and what they do. It just, yeah, it is such a deep, deep place of brokenness. And the worst part about it is the people who are in charge are eighth grade playground bullies when it comes down to it. I mean, they don't know any better either. It's a bunch of children trying to maintain control over eternity, and it's just horrible. Um, and it really speaks to how vulnerable we are, how frail our minds are as humans, that like even myself, I mean, 8 years past college, and I finally things clicked that, oh my goodness, all along I've known better, but I couldn't accept it. And and I don't know if the journey, if there's ever going to be a point of healing and change. I mean, I think it's kind of a journey. Um, and it is a journey that just, I think, will be on, and but I have to remember the positive sides, what I have learned, the growth I've had. And although some in some ways it's kind of nice, but so many people in the church are oblivious to what they are experiencing every day. They're satisfied with the life, and there are some people who are actually very happy. And I mean, I guess that's good for them, but they're missing so much. Yeah, I don't know. The context and the lens with which I look through now is so meaningful to me. And I think a lot of people feel the same way who have gone through this and exited. And um yeah.
Yeah, if there was anything that I would love to see change in the Holdeman Church, it would be, to release their almost kind of desperate need to keep up appearances to the public. And I, because it's kind of a catch-22, it's almost like, the harder you try and the more control you have over those efforts, in just, you know, the controlling manner that they go about trying to protect their kind of the image, that they want to keep up for the public. I mean, yeah, the more they do that, the more almost kind of insidious it becomes. Whereas if they were to release that and just say, we're human, this stuff happens here just like it does anyone else. We're not above or below anyone else. And so, yeah, unfortunately, abuse happens in the rest of the world, and we have it here too. But we're also doing our best to help the victims heal. I think there'd be so much more honor in that, and people would, especially I myself, I would have so much more respect for that than trying to, desperately sweep all of this under the rug. And when, at that point, the truth is bound to come out at some point, and it's going to come out in a way that makes you look far worse than if you had just dealt with the issue properly in the first place and been straight up and honest about it in the first place. So that is one thing that I would like to see change. And the other thing is the avoidance. The avoidance is so damaging. I understand that level of alienation is kind of the control that enables them to, well, the alienation is what is the control, right? But it's those two things that are, those are the biggest things that I wish would change within the church, is doing away with the avoidance and the way that abuse situations are handled. I have no desire to change their belief system. No desire. Of course, there were times when I first left where I was like, oh my God, everybody just needs to leave. That place is just awful for everybody. And in some ways, there's still truth in that. But I also see how I just have no desire to dedicate my life to converting people or saving people. And one of the reasons why is because I have completely released any belief of hell. And so that's no longer a part of my belief system. And once I shed that particular part of my belief system, there's no longer any pressure to make sure that people are on the right path, and you don't feel the responsibility of making sure you're doing your part to ensure that they're on the right path. I believe that hell is a figurative term to speak about what happens when you do things in your lifetime that are not beneficial to you or the people around you, and the consequence that will come as a result of that. So that's just my personal belief, which really kind of releases this tendency to try to control and make sure that everyone else is on the right path. If that's the belief system that's bringing them the most fulfillment, or where they need to be, where they feel they need to be, by all means continue on, but try to do it without causing harm to other humans.
I like your 2 points, but it raises a question for me. Do you feel like if those two things became true within the context of the church, and maybe some other things too, but do you feel like the church itself would kind of come crashing down if those things were realized?
I think it would just take on a vastly different form. It would probably resemble, I know you talked about being in college in Goshen, Indiana, right? So there's a bunch of different forms of Mennonite groups out there. Some that, probably originate from the Minnow Simons, that's where they originated from, just like the Holdemans is a branch off of that and everything. So I think that it would just take on a form of maybe a more liberal form of Mennonite church. And along with that, I think that that the first belief that would have to go to take on the form that I'm imagining is the one true church doctrine. Um, and then I think at that point it would just be more of a liberal Mennonite church, like you would see in the Goshen area. That's kind of typical out there. That's
Mhm.
my, I don't know. Obviously, reality would have many different ways of playing out than what I can imagine, but
Yeah. Well, and I think that's true. I think it's something that it would be a quite an unfolding, but I think it would probably have to take that direction at least as a step. And for me, that was a step. I had a good friend who actually left Heston, Kansas, went to Goshen right about the same time I did, was a minister at an assimilated Mennonite church, and I went there and I loved it. That was the hardest part about leaving Goshen, was leaving the wonderful group of people I had there at Silverwood Mennonite. I'll shout them out a little bit, but yeah, that's an interesting assessment you made about kind of the possible direction they could go. Um, and I almost felt like at some point it's going to have to. This next generation, they are becoming so much more aware um, of um, the real world and how it works. And I don't know if it was during the recording or not, but um, I'm a little concerned about what could happen considering they haven't been taught media literacy and how to analyze sources and think critically. But we all had to eventually, so perhaps that's just part of the journey. But seeing what they do with what they've learned, because there's so many things they know and know about, even if it's some dumb meme video, in that way they already know so much more than we did back when we scratched the lenses out of the cameras on the flip phone and those things. Yeah, it's just such it's such an interesting dynamic right now, and seeing how they are pushing the boundaries of the church from within, um, but at the same time still wanting to be a part. They don't want to leave, they want to change it inside, because otherwise they would just leave. But no, they are staying in and doing what they can while pushing the boundaries. And so it's interesting to see that, but also I'm very curious to see how things go and what happens. What's going to happen when they hear this podcast, and they hear what you had to say, and they don't have a chance to, um, I don't know the English word for that, but they can't write their own meaning to it. It's here, it's raw, it's publicly available, and they can't adjust it. Um, yeah, I'm really excited to hear you and what you're sharing, but also I'm excited to see what a positive impact it can make just simply by people being able to hear you tell your story from you and as yourself. That's really powerful, and I think it's yeah, I hope that um, helps you feel well about sharing what you have, because it's something that is going to be so beneficial for people to hear. I mean, even us, we have the privilege of being the people producing the podcast. We get to hear these stories from multiple people in the raw and interact with them, and it's very healing to tell it, and it's also healing to hear other people tell their story, and most of us haven't been able to hear that. People do leave, we can't hear their story.
yeah, 100%. One of the things that one of the reasons why I was motivated to do this is because I feel like the sexual abuse aspect is one of the things that is rarely, if ever, discussed or talked about. And I also, so I feel like there's just this part of me that wants to normalize that conversation more and make it a little less taboo, because I mean, you can't heal in silence and isolation. And, um, I mean, that's actually not true. You can heal anywhere at any time, but it's a lot more difficult to heal when you are completely on your own with that. And I speak from experience. There's so much of that that I had to navigate completely on my own. And so that's a huge motivating factor for me choosing to do this podcast. And also, I guess delete this if it's not allowed, but I also wanted to open up my socials or my DMs or whatever to anyone that might be going through that and needs a listening ear. Because for many years I really could have benefited from having someone like that in my life that understood and was there for me to talk to, and I didn't have that. So I'm more than happy to provide that for someone if they're looking for that and don't have it.
It's wonderful. I need to go before long because I'm Central Time, and it's getting to be late for us, um but I don't want to cut things off, and so I guess I would say um yeah, continue as long, but I might step out if you have more things to share yet. Um but yeah, I'm just so glad that you came on. You came on.
And awesome to talk to. I really enjoyed like hearing a little bit about where you guys come from and what your experience was like. Well, I guess maybe some of that happened before we hopped on this recording. um, yeah, it's been awesome talking to you, both of you guys.
Something I've started wanting as we have started doing this project is I feel like we should make a group, a group text, chat, whatever, with everybody that's been on the podcast, and we become a therapy group or something, because I felt you feel connected to each person you talk to, and it's just amazing to see the work that everyone's put in, and it just feels like together we could be such a force and help each other. Yeah, it's been quite an experience already.
I'm on with that. 100%.
I'm excited for the point when the church takes notice of this. Because different things along the way have come up, and I've seen where they've tried to squelch or try to counteract in different ways. Um, but I don't know. I have a feeling that this might be too hot for them to handle, which is so exciting.
Yeah, I think for me that's what's so important here. Like I'm not, like you said, you're not interested in ending the church or converting people, and I feel the same way about that. I'm not interested in tearing it down, trashing it, but I'm very interested in people's emotional states in and after the church. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, promoting that positive sense of accepting yourself, accepting that you have emotions, they are created as part of you. They're not good or bad. They are there, um, and even if the furthest people go, it's still miles ahead of where we were when, you know, I'm so guilty and I feel so lost and sinful, and I'm such a terrible being and I must surrender, or else. Um, and just the concept of that, and the mental hoops you have to jump through, and how harmful that is, to be taught that is your basic self, and then everything that spills from that, to show people that you are created, you are fine how you are, you experience what you experience, and you feel what you feel, and those things are neutral, and they're things that you can use to help guide your exploration as a human, and they can be a positive, good part of life, um, and while I say that and I cognitively believe that, I still have to internalize it. But yeah, it's a good way forward, and I think it's the start of a lot of, um, kind of an awakening, uh, that is, going to be kind of unavoidable, I think.
You bring up such a great point. I struggle. I mean, I've with that particular point in Christianity that we're, I guess, born, worthless sinners and are nothing without a savior. I mean, I am at the point where I'm almost at the opposite end of the spectrum where I believe we are born divine and born with such an amazing like inherent value, and any belief that we take on, any belief system is just meant to enhance that amazing value that we are born with. I struggle to grasp that particular belief that we are um, worth nothing without some savior. And but that's a highly that's very based on each individual, and that's just my particular take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way you describe that, I think is beautiful. I was thinking much the same thing. I can't I look at my own children and I can't imagine trying to instill in those little children that they're inherently evil. The concept of original sin and inherited evil, I can't understand how anyone who believes in a just God, how is it just for a child to be evil? That's just beyond me. Yeah, I think that's one of the most damaging, probably one of the most damaging beliefs any religion carries, is that we're inherently evil.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The dismal place to be, to frame your to frame your lens you look through. Um, and I think deep down we know better. Um, I mean, even Holdeman would people would say they tend to populate themselves around people who are socially somewhat adjacent, whether they're other groups of Mennonites or just kind of similarly minded people, and whether they like it or not, they also are socioeconomically somewhat equal, and they are politically equal, even though Holdeman's those aren't things they would accept that are part of their fabric, but they are. And with that, we would always say, those people in town, they are good, or they might be saved, they're not, they don't know enough, so they're all right. uh so yeah, I think the meter is reading that maybe deep down we know better, but we can't control people without that narrative. Unless people are running from something that they can't really escape, we can't control them without physical punishment and a lock and key. And perhaps even more, this lens of looking at life and how it can control people is more powerful, because spiritually and mentally we are we are where we are. And if you get locked in a box, you can still believe how you believe. Um, I don't know, that's getting kind of into a very deep, different place, um, but yeah, the lock and key of the mind and how they do everything they can to secure that. And for what? I do. It's just interesting to me. It's to learn what is motivating the desire for that, because there are two sides I see within the system. There is the side, and I think it's a majority of people who are truly, honestly believing all these doctrines and keeping them because they believe it, because they've been taught it. But then there are people within the system, within the church, who know better. And how I know they know better is because of the rhythm with which they bring the the media they do, whether it's letters or revivals or different things, and the pattern and what they say and how it happens and the emotional roller coaster that happens with those things shows me that there are people within the system. They know what they're doing. But the question I have is why? Do they just get that satisfaction about seeing a congregation as a unit jump through hoops, and that is something that is satisfying? I don't know. Um, I know there are different sectors within the church where there are financial incentives and gains that happen, but yeah, I don't know. These are things that would be interesting to try to unravel, but they very much um, connect to how the power structures operate, and the unfortunate reality is the people who are defenseless suffer the most, because there are a lot of people within the church who really just kind of have it made, and they get to do whatever they want, really. And that's what's really disgusting to me, is seeing some people who frankly are just vile, and they you know they dump that on people. I don't know. And that's a whole nother topic, whole nother topic to get on. But I think this is another example of how those things are playing out, and what happens, and who gets ejected because of it. Because excommunication really happens at the point they feel they can't control anymore.
That's one ironic part about the one true church belief system that I find so interesting, is that when you have that belief to cover you, it is just insane to me the amount of shadows that lurk in the background that can grow to be so large, and it's so accepted because you're part of the one true church. And so, and if you have the church leadership favor, and they're even mostly unchecked, like they have no accountability really to keep those shadows in check. And so when you're it's just so ironic because I'm sure most people, when they think of a one true church, they think of the most pure environment. But in reality, when you are carrying that belief system, it leaves so much room for shadows to go completely unchecked. And I use the term shadow because I think that words have power, and I don't ever want to that speak into existence that someone in particular is evil. I think that's a really extreme stance to take. My personal belief is that all of the darkness in the world is really just unhealed trauma. And so then it's an extra layer of unnecessary trauma to label them as evil on top of that. So that's definitely something that could probably be debated for several hours.
Yeah. I think it's a very healthy and positive, forward-looking way. Because one thing we sometimes would talk about is, while they're living, there's still time before eternity. Um, I wouldn't say that, but I would say while they're living, there's still time for healing, growth, and possibility to happen. And that's kind of the way I think about the church overall. And it's something that thankfully I was able to realize earlier on, although it was very twisted in the way it came out, in accepting my mother for who she was, even though she wouldn't come to the church, but that same frame, and it also releases a lot of pressure. Um, it doesn't change the fact that we do have to call for righteousness and justice to happen. Um, you know, the fact that we aren't supposed to want justice is just inhumane, and it's not godly. Um, if we had gotten justice, we would have all been in hell. And it's like, well, no, that's so convoluted for a start, but it's just not, um, it's not productive. It's not growth. It's not learning. It's not healing. Um, but with that, that's about the most I should say. I have a problem with I can talk too much because I'm neurospicy. So one thing connects to another, and pretty soon we've been here an hour. But
Speaking of
I
justice, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I love that term, neurospicy. That's anyway, go
I
ahead.
I heard something the other day that I've been thinking about, just the word justice and mercy. Somebody made the comment that mercy is the suspension of justice. And I've been thinking about that. I'm not sure if that's true, if I agree with it. Yeah.
who said it?
I don't remember who said it. It was actually an argument against the Christian God, I think. It was
Oh,
something about, if it would not be possible to be just and merciful because mercy is a suspension of justice. It's just something I've been thinking about.
that kind of catches my brain. There was somebody put, all these WhatsApp statuses. Um, yeah. Uh, and it kind of goes hand in hand with this. God will forgive you if you forgive others. Forgiving those who cause offense is often exceedingly difficult, and yet forgiveness is one of the most beautiful and important teachings of Jesus Christ, and it is central to the gospel because without it, you can't go to heaven. It's like, well, Jesus didn't teach it, and that's very out of context. Because what I've found is Jesus, usually if you're following Jesus and looking at just like the stories and teachings within context, usually I feel like the Holdemans really wouldn't like Jesus. I don't know. If Jesus showed up, he'd be like, I'm out of here. I'm turning over your folding tables and that fellowship hall. I'm out. Goodbye.
Well, it's interesting that
No.
that's a lot to unpack, but I do want to take one little piece of that, the forgiveness piece. One thing that a conclusion that I've kind of arrived at on that topic is that, and I remember this being reinforced throughout my childhood and my years in the Holdeman church, is that forgiveness is a choice and it is something that you can decide to do kind of on the spot. And if you're deciding not to do that, then you are choosing the path of darkness, essentially. And the pressure that I always felt to forgive my abuser was unreal. And what I have come to believe for myself is that forgiveness is something that you naturally arrive at when you heal properly. It's not something that you can force or pressure yourself into, or it is definitely a choice, but it's not something that you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I choose to forgive them and now I'm free. It's more this ongoing healing process where you work layer by layer by layer by painful freaking layer, to do the work on yourself so that you can live your life without being weighed down by all of that baggage or internalized negative beliefs. And when you can get to that point, it's no longer even a question of whether you've forgiven someone or not. It is just a natural state of being that you arrive at. So that's my little spiel on forgiveness.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think,
and I think it is true. And really it's something that it's even Christ-centered. There is no forgiveness without repentance. And people always use that as this ploy to make sure you repent or Jesus is not going to absolve you. But really, I think it's an example of we can't fully come to that until there's some sort of reconciliation. And that doesn't mean throwing two people together in a room and battling it out, but there's healing, and that can come with or without, but it's the healing with or without the other person that happens that causes that, because the forgiveness is also, um it's somewhat tied to us too. And so I really, that's a really interesting how you put that. Um, I never came to that conclusion quite like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be a good place to kind of wrap it up with that thought that forgiveness is a natural state when we've healed enough. Yeah. I feel like this went really well, and especially with everything you've talked about, I don't think this was easy for you, and I'm really impressed with your journey. Yeah, and really want to thank you for being willing to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have done an amazing job of hosting and pulling out the right answers out of me and all of that. So I really appreciate this. It was a great experience. And I knew coming into this that, worst case scenario, I'll crash and burn and learn something from it. Best case
Yeah.
scenario, it helps someone out there that is maybe experiencing some of the same things that I went through and can relate with my story. And yeah, I feel like I know two new awesome people now.
Yeah. You have anything yet, Billy?
I don't. I other than just saying thank you. And um yeah, this is the second one that where I've been involved. We have a few others that have been taped. Um, but yeah, I don't quite have words for the power of this, both for me, but also I think for others and what it will bring. And yeah, I don't know why I'm always involved in troublemaking. I mean, it's called troublemaking to them, but I'm always that person shaking something up, and I'm glad I've learned to accept that rather than feel shame for it. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how this shakes something, get some people thinking, make some waves. And I think too, um, being being a place of safety for people. And I think too, as you talked about, like us bringing things out, I don't think that was necessarily the case so much as and I think all of us involved with this project, kind of our goal is to just create a space where people feel safe to just say these things. Um, and because we know that uh, this is also a proving ground for other people who want to share their stories. And when we give people the safe place to be able to share their story, that opens the way for other people. And who knows what 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 we might learn, but also who knows who might feel safe to speak for the first time. And so I just really commend you and thank you for participating in our project. It's kind of in its beginnings, but I think it's something I'm really excited to see the future of it.
Yeah, I really believe in the work that you guys are doing and this platform that you're creating. Otherwise, I wouldn't have agreed to come on here. But yeah, it's great for whatever my opinion is worth.
Cool. Well, I think I better run. I smell the supper's about cooked. I was supposed to fix supper, but it went on. Me and Henry, my dog, came in to let me know it's time.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.